Okay, I have to tell you about this because it's a story that should be as famous as the fall of Rome, but it's not. And honestly, it's infuriating. It's about the day the world's greatest center of learning was just turned to ash. And the craziest part? Most of us have never even heard of it.
I mean, really think about that. We all learn about the Library of Alexandria. We mourn its loss. But what if I told you there was another library, a whole university actually, that was so much bigger, and its destruction was so complete, it was almost erased from history itself? To get what we lost, you have to understand what this place was. Nalanda. It wasn't just a school. For 700 years, it was the intellectual heart of the world, period. It was the single greatest concentration of knowledge on the entire planet. 10,000 students. Not over centuries, 10,000 students living and studying there at the same time. Just try to picture the biggest university you can think of. Nalanda was on that scale, but 1,500 years ago. And get this, 2,000 teachers for 10,000 students. The ratio is just incredible. These weren't just any teachers, they were the most brilliant minds of their age, all gathered in one single place. And people came from everywhere. This was a global campus, long before the term existed. People walked for months, sometimes years, across deserts, over the Himalayas, just for the chance to study here. From Persia, Korea, China, all across Asia. It was that important. At its very center was the library. It was called Dharma Ganja. It wasn't just one building, it was a whole complex. One of the buildings was 9 stories tall. They called it the Treasury of Dharma, the treasury of all knowledge. 9 million. That's the number of manuscripts they had. 9 million. Every subject you can possibly imagine. Medicine, astronomy, mathematics, logic, philosophy. Entire schools of thought that we now know existed only because they were written down within these walls. And here's some perspective. We rightly mourn the loss of the 700,000 scrolls at Alexandria. It was a tragedy. But Nalanda? It had over 12 times that amount. This wasn't just a library. It was a universe of human thought. And then, it just ended. It wasn't a slow decline. It wasn't a fading away. It was a violent, sudden full stop. The year was around 1193, and the man responsible was a Turkic military general named Bakhtiar Khilji. His army was sweeping through the region. He came across this massive walled complex, saw thousands of men with shaved heads, and he made a fatal error. He thought it was a military fort, and he attacked. This timeline is just brutal to look at. 700 years. A 700-year-long conversation between the world's brightest minds, destroyed. And just a few decades later, it was a ghost town, silent. After the monks and scholars were slaughtered, the army set fire to the library. Now, stop and think about this for a second. The library burned for 3 months. Can you imagine the sheer volume of fuel of 9 million manuscripts required to keep a fire going for that long? 3 solid months of knowledge turning into smoke. Just 30-some years later, a Tibetan monk named Dharmaswamin made the long journey to see Nalanda for himself. He found ruins, empty buildings, and his words are just haunting. He wrote, "There was absolutely no one to look after them. The silence of that place must have been deafening." And for centuries, that's kind of where the story ended. A total, unrecoverable loss. A catastrophe. But that's not quite where the story ends. Not entirely. In the middle of all that chaos, some escaped. A handful of monks and scholars, they saw what was happening. They grabbed whatever precious few manuscripts they could carry, and they ran. They fled north, over the treacherous mountains, and into Tibet. And this is the part that is just unbelievable. Ancient Indian knowledge, its own foundational texts on medicine, math, philosophy, so much of it survived only because Tibetan monks ran fast enough in the 12th century. For hundreds of years, if you wanted to study India's lost knowledge, you had to go to Tibet. India had to recover its own history from another country. And that brings us to the real loss, the part that can never, ever be recovered, the unhealed wound that fire left behind. See, you can save a book. If you're lucky, if you're brave, you can run into a burning building and carry a manuscript out. The information itself survives.
But you can't save the living knowledge, the context, the debates, the nuance, the unbroken chain of a teacher passing understanding to a student who then becomes a teacher themselves. That's the stuff that dies in a fire like this.
So that's what was really lost. Not just a library, but a living tradition. 7 centuries of uninterrupted human conversation, of discovery, of argument and debate. That chain was snapped. It was vaporized.
And that's the question that hangs over the ashes of Nalanda. Buildings can be rebuilt. Books can sometimes be rewritten. But how do you ever restart a conversation that was 700 years in the making? The truth is, you can't. That silence is forever.